Our first video for this term, and we're going to be looking at an introduction to biodiversity and ecosystems. On the slide that we've got on the screen at the moment, we discussed the post-video activities. Now, each of these activities are going to vary in length and difficulty, so some of them will be quite short. There might be a list or there might be a couple of questions. Others will take considerably longer. So next week we have a debate which I'll introduce in one of the videos later on in this week. The idea behind them is to, one, force you to watch the videos, but two, and more importantly, it gives you an opportunity to actually illustrate your understanding of the concepts that have been covered in class. So for example, the one at the end of this first video, you're going to be looking specifically at the skills or the understandings that we've described in the video. If you complete these, they're not going to be marked, however, they are going to form part of your application grade. So this is going to form my understanding of whether or not you deserve a merit, as well as give an idea of that excellent, very good, or good rating that you'll get in terms of your attitude towards the subject. So now we're going into chapter 4.1, which is our very first introduction to ecosystems. Here we have a slide about key concepts. So by the end of chapter 4.1, at the end of this week more or less, you should be able to do these things, and you can read through them as you like. Each video or each chapter will have a set of key concepts which you'll need to be able to hit each of those. So first of all, we need to look at the different faces or the different types of biodiversity. And there are three. We categorize things in science, remember, so that it makes it easier to communicate with that. So there's molecular or genetic diversity. Now, molecular or genetic diversity is really just a description of genotype variation, different types of genes found in a population. Our species diversity or our population diversity is all of the different types of organisms, the different species that are able to be found in a specific habitat. And then our ecosystem diversity is across a whole biosphere, so it might be the whole of the earth or a country or a state like South Australia. What are the different types of ecosystems that are able to be found? So if we use our own country as our own state as an example, we have a coastal ecosystem right around the coast, so Glenelg and West Beach and those sorts of areas. As we go further in towards closer to the city, we've really got what traditionally would have been grassland plains. Obviously now it's a cityscape. And then as we go further out towards the east, we have our hills, and further north we have our desert and dry sort of arid landscapes. So those are different ecosystems, and we'll describe those in much more detail in subsequent videos. So the importance of biodiversity, why is it such an important thing? Well, really what we're looking at here is stability. When an ecosystem is healthy and has a broad variety of diversity, so lots of genetic diversity, lots of population diversity, and as a biosphere has lots of ecosystem diversity, we have a stable and healthy environment, which means that it can tolerate changes within a certain extent. Now, as we remove diversity, we're going to reduce the ability of the environment to withstand change. So as a very simple example, and this will be a repeated theme, if we go to farming as an example of reducing diversity. With farms, we flatten the land and plant a single crop. And that single crop means that then only those animals that are able to eat that crop are able to survive. And that's if the farmers don't put pesticides and those sorts of things down to prevent that from occurring. So if we've got these animals, and only those animals that prey on those animals, or predators that prey on the animals, are able to survive. And so anything that might require something larger, so for example, if we've got quite a large animal like a Tasmanian tiger, then that's not going to be able to survive just eating mice and rats and those sorts of organisms. It's going to need larger prey. And so eventually what happens, well, the Tasmanian tiger becomes extinct. And so we have other problems that eventuate because of that. So this stability, this biodiversity is so important. The other consideration for a country like ours, like Australia, is that we have a terrific amount of endemic species. More than 80% of the organisms, the plants and the animals that we find in Australia are unique to us. That's what endemic means. Unfortunately, quite a number of those endemic species are endangered, and we'll talk about the risks with endemic species, species that are only found in a specific area, and why they're at greater risk of extinction. But we have already lost quite a number. I've already mentioned the Tasmanian tiger, but there's a huge number of plant species and animal species that have already become extinct. So there's a big concern here. Now we need to look at the structure of an ecosystem so that we can work on a common frame. So first of all, we have our individual. Now this is just as the image shows, an individual bison. Now there's not a large amount of interest here in terms of ecology, very much the organism stuff. We're looking more at the cellular level, the microbiological level, and those sorts of things. So that's not really going to be much of our focus. We're going to start at the population level for the most part. And this is where we can discuss our things like our genetic diversity. So what are the differences within that population? As we go up into the community is all living organisms within a particular habitat. Now this is where we can start to discuss the different groups of species, so our population diversity. As we go up one more, we've got our ecosystem. And our ecosystem composes the living and non-living components. And this is where we get our differences to do with our environment. So the coastal ecosystems, deserts, desert ecosystems, etc. Lastly, we have our biosphere. Now, we can alter the terms of reference for our biosphere, so we can consider the whole of the world as our biosphere, or in some cases we might define it as South Australia, or indeed even Australia, the whole country. So there's a few differences there. Where we're looking at now a comparison of ecosystems discussion. So this is your first discussion and the last slide for this video. You'll need to go online and click on the discussion for comparison of ecosystems. You'll need to follow the prompts there, the questions that you'll need to answer there. But I'd also ask that you do some research. So whether it's Google or your textbook or another book, however it goes, use some sort of mechanism, but use some sort of research for that. So that brings us to the end of our first video, Year 11s. Please remember to email questions if you have them.